Iain Duncan Smith, what does this moment represent to you?
I think it's a very important moment because this is, you'll have to have been over 58 to have ever had a vote in the last referendum. So there's clearly a big moment for many people who've never had a say on whether or not they want to stay within the European Union or re-establish that sense of independence and buccaneering, global trader that many of us believe we should be.
And is there anything that the Prime Minister could have secured in his deal that would have made you want to stay in the European Union?
I think the speech that he made a few years ago set out what I thought to be the right terms of engagement. The Bloomberg speech, in which he talked about a wholesale return of powers, a complete cultural shift in the European Union away from the concept of ever deeper union. But more importantly, it's worth remembering something quite important, and I say this to many of my colleagues. It's only the UK that thinks of the European Union as a marketplace. The rest of the European Union actually sees it as a political union. And if you go back to Spinelli, who was probably one of the great architects of the Single European Act and of the Maastricht Treaty, you've very clearly established that they use the marketplace to drive the process of political union. It's only a device to get us to political union. I think that's fair, that's reasonable, that's what they want. It's only in the UK we play this rather silly game of pretending it's something else. It's not. It's a political union which has some market elements attached. It's not the other way around.
So then the Prime Minister is still engaging in what you describe as a silly game.
Well, it is a game that every single UK government has played pretty much since we first entered what was then the common market. And the key point here is just to say, look, we have a serious debate about this, and it is a serious debate should be on the grounds of what we have, not what we might have or have had. And the reality is that we have an entity called the European Union. It is a political union, and it intends to get deeper and tighter because that is how it sees itself. And there are reasons that many in Europe feel like that. The marketplace itself has never really been defined. It's not really enshrined in any of the treaties. It's more of a creation at the time of Delors and Spinelli and others who wanted to use it as a mechanism to get us towards the idea of political union. So I can understand the arguments from that side of the fence. I wholly accept that that is a rationale. I don't agree with it, but that's their rationale. For us, I think it's really critical for us to recognise, therefore, that if we don't want to be part of that political union, then I think the answer is we should leave, forge proper trading relationships with the European Union, proper arrangements of friends. I mean, I'm friends with the European Union. I love many countries in Europe. My family has lived in parts of Europe for most of their lives. I am deeply attached to the idea of being good friends, good trading neighbours, and working with them, cooperating on security and defence and things like that.
So, in your view, what has the Prime Minister achieved then? It's clearly fallen far short of his original intentions.
Certainly far short of the Bloomberg speech, but what he set out to try and do within these limited constraints is get some key areas to do with limitations with migrants accepting, getting UK benefits. Not exactly what we set out for, but nonetheless he's achieved something there, and I think a number of other issues and areas where he has got some kind of changes going on. But overall, you have to see this as a balance of packages. Does this actually reverse the process of the deepening of a political union? Mm-hmm. And the answer I have is no. And in fact, it's quite interesting. If I go back to Maastricht, and this is quite an important point, I know people say, oh, don't bang all about Maastricht, and I don't intend to. I mean, I haven't spoken about Europe now for 10 years, so this is literally the first time I've done an interview on Europe. But the point about Maastricht is I remember when the Prime Minister, John Major, came back and they said it was game, set and match. They'd reached the high tide of federalism, that now was the chance for Britain to drive Europe in its direction. All of that was said, and therefore it was right to have Maastricht. We've had 3-4 treaties since then. We've lost huge amounts of more powers over to the European Union, to these unelected bureaucrats. And we are still engaged in much the same things. A bit of déjà vu, actually, yesterday when I was hearing some of the comments from my colleagues saying, that we've now changed direction and we've sorted this out. In actual fact, we've lost huge powers since the last time we said that, and yet we've not reversed any of them. And that's the key bit, is that we go on, in a sense, persuading ourselves that what is in reality there is not there, and it's something else that we're dealing with.
So is the Prime Minister deluding himself, or is he just wrong?
I think his intentions are really straight and honest. I think he genuinely feels that we are better off in the European Union, despite the fact that much and many of the things that happen there do not help us particularly.
But I
just disagree. I think it is time for us to have that debate and to leave the European Union structures but actually have proper trade and cooperation with the European Union.
But that's a rather different question. My question was, is he deluding himself that he's got something real here that will be a fundamental change, as he claims, or is he just wrong about what he's achieved?
No, I think he genuinely feels, he wouldn't say that he felt that, if he felt that he had got something which stopped the European Union from doing things that he didn't want. I only reflect on the fact that the same comments were made pretty much by John Major 24 years ago, and yet we've had many treaties since then taking more and more powers from us since. I don't think there is a high tide of federalism. I think you have to go back and understand that the European Union is what it is. It is a political entity, and most of the countries are very happy to be part of that political journey. We are not. And what is clear from the Prime Minister and everybody else, legitimately, they don't want to be either. So the question really is, how do we stop that? And it's the only way to do that is to say, look, we have to step out. We have to have a proper trading arrangements, cooperation, support with our friends, but not to be part of the political union that is essentially the European Union. And that means leaving and getting better arrangements.
Now, the history of all this is very clearly ringing in your ears. You know more than anybody else how bad things got inside the Conservative Party over Europe. How worried are you that this might happen again? And are you prepared to put your principles over the unity of the party?
I think it is possible for the Conservative Party to have a genuine and open debate. Again, I congratulate and thank the Prime Minister for being generous enough to allow Cabinet Ministers, without having to leave the Cabinet, to actually openly debate this issue. That shows some strength, I think. But I think the party in the Cabinet yesterday was quite sensible. They said that we want to have this debate. It will be a robust debate because it is about the future of this great country of ours. But nonetheless, it can be done without personalities. This is not, as I said, about the Prime Minister. This is about Britain's future. So we will debate and argue these issues, but I think, and I want the Conservative Party to, stay friends and stay cooperative, and we don't need to fall apart about this issue.
But the Prime Minister this morning has accused people who want to campaign for out, like yourself, of linking arms with Nigel Farage and George Galloway. Now, for most Conservatives, that would not be seen as a compliment.
I'm not aware that I'm linking any arms with Mr Farage or Mr Galloway, and I certainly won't be taking part in any debates.
That's what the Prime Minister has accused you of this morning.
Well, I haven't seen what he said. All I would say categorically is the group that I'm involved with, Vote Leave, is about reasonable and decent people getting on who just care and are concerned about the nature of the European Union and wanting to leave it. And I think it's quite important actually to make this point, I think, which is that I think for most people, most reasonable and decent people, there is a genuine concern about where they're going. And we hear a lot from big business and a lot from big government and a lot from corporate banks. But actually, out in the high street, amongst many people, and small shopkeepers and businessmen and people who actually wonder about whether or not they can control their own lives, I think you will see this is a debate about ordinary people versus the corporates and the big governments. And it's about people saying, I think I've had enough. I would like to be able to control my own life through a government that I elect and a government that I can chuck out, give and take nothing that comes from the European Union.
But just to go back to the Prime Minister's language, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about politeness and civility and a grown-up debate. Is it helpful then for him, straight out of the traps, to be throwing around accusations like that?
Well, as I said, this debate will be a robust debate. I'm not a shrinking violet. I'm quite happy to take that on the chin. I simply say to all my colleagues who are keen on voting in, I think they should not in any way misrepresent the motives of any of us who are determined to leave the European Union, such as Michael Gove and myself. I certainly won't accuse anybody else of sharing platforms with anybody. I have a very simple principle, and if it was just me on my own and nobody else, I would still be here having this interview with you, saying that the best thing for this great country of ours, that I have actually fought for and served for in all these years, is that we should leave the European Union, we should establish better trading relationships and better deals around friendship and cooperation, and not spend our time being angry with the European Union because we can't get our way.
Do you expect Boris Johnson to join your side?
I clearly hope that Boris joins. I hope that as many of my colleagues who are ministers join us, because I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help reshape the country that we actually wanted to be elected to govern. And Boris, I don't know. I've known Boris long enough to know that you never quite know what Boris is going to do until he finally does it. So I urge him to do the right thing, but it's up to him, and I respect whatever decision he makes.
Let's look at some of the policy areas then. The Prime Minister has said this morning the details on the benefit plans still need to be worked out. Now, if this emergency brake goes forward, if the limitations on child benefits go forward, many of that would have to be worked out with your government department. Are the plans workable?
Well, obviously we're going to have to look carefully. What I do get from this, for the most part, having looked in some detail at this, is that the Prime Minister has secured a deal, but it's a deal very much, I think, in principle, because a lot of the detail won't absolutely be thrashed out until after the UK decides to stay or leave. So if the UK decides to stay, then of course my department and myself will actually do our level best to ensure that we can deliver these changes. They're not simple, they are quite complex, but nonetheless we'll have to deliver them.
But from what you've seen, do you think that they're workable?
Well, again, a lot of the detail of these is not there. I mean, there are question marks about these, and the Prime Minister, I think, in his earlier interviews has indicated that those questions will have to be settled later, such as, you know, does that include a change in the rate of exchange for the child benefit calculation on a regular basis, weekly or daily? You know, things that are around the complication about the sliding scale, or when does it start, and by how much, you know, 50%, 20%. All these, of course, are details, but the one thing that my department and the government does when we have to do it is we figure these things out and we try and make them work, and that's what we'll do. The
big political aim in all of that, of course, is to try to lower the numbers of people coming to this country. From what you've seen of the plans, do you think they'd have any impact on immigration?
Well, there is a certain pull factor, clearly, if it is possible for you to accept and get benefits in work. We've now ruled that out through universal credit. I designed it in such a way that it could not, we don't have to pay any benefits to out-of-work people, so that didn't need any treaty change. This is for in-work people, and there is, I suppose, some pull factor. It's a very small amount of the proportion of the welfare that we spend, probably in single-figure percentages. But there is some pull factor, and it therefore may turn out that reduces some of those people coming in. But the big issue is not really around welfare, and I've made this clear privately and publicly. The big issue is around control of our own borders within the European Union to those who are citizens of various countries in the European Union, and those borders are absolutely wide open, and they do cause real problems for people. They have put pressure on earnings, they put pressure on people who have skilled jobs, and losing those because others with skills have come in, cheaper to employ. So these are big issues for people, and this is no good, people, by the way, throwing around this as some kind of extremist issue. It's not. Ordinary people do worry about the scale of change. We are a country that has always prided ourselves, long before the European Union existed, in taking some of the most dispossessed people from around the world. The great Jewish migration driven out by Germany, and in the pogroms of the early 19th century from Russia, when we took Jewish people over here and treated them well, and many other migrants, and we are proud of that tradition of giving asylum to people who need it. But it has to be done at a scale and a pace that people can accept, otherwise you lead to difficulties and tensions in communities which should be avoided. And so I think the lack of any control on our borders is a critical issue here, because it's not that we don't want people to come in, quite the contrary. We want people to come in, though, at a pace and a rate that we can absorb them and work with them and allow them to be, not to be maltreated, by the way, by companies who pay them cash and they think that they have to do that. We want to have it properly done. And
quite clearly then you think the Prime Minister's plans will not make a substantial difference to the levels of people coming into this country?
I think that is clearly an issue. He knows that. We all know that the one area, the glaring area that he has wanted to have changed, we originally wanted a break on migration, not just on the benefits. And the European Union and other countries absolutely point blank refused even to discuss it. So I have to say that this area does remain wide open. And there's a further concern.
But he's saying something different. This is important. He's saying something else. He's saying this will have an impact, and you're saying it will not. You said it's a glaring area.
I say the restriction on benefits, we can't be certain, but I would say that it will have some effect on reducing the migration of those who are coming just to claim in-work benefits. But as I said, it's a very small amount. The big number is on borders. And there's another concern and a risk too, which within the migration issue in meltdown around the European Union, with the European Union almost incapable, it seems, of handling this massive wave of migration coming in from, not just, by the way, Syria. We hear today about Pakistanis and others coming into Hungary and having a problem. You see that various people from different parts of Iran are coming in. So it's not just from one country. And what we see with the European Union, its incapacity to get its act together. that leads to tensions. Who's to say in the next few years countries that have taken people from various areas aren't then going to give them kind of leave to remain and even passports, as we've seen in some cases, and then in due course may well turn up again in the UK. So these are big issues further down the road for us, because this open border does not allow us to check and control people that may come and may spend time. We've seen what happened in Paris, where they spent ages planning and plotting, so who's to say it's not beyond the wit of man that those might already be thinking about that.
So staying in the EU, in your view, makes us more vulnerable, potentially, to Paris-style attacks?
I think the present status of the open border we have right now, many of us feel, does actually leave that door open, and we need to see that resolved, and that was a critical component of the negotiations.
You see, when you hear the Prime Minister and people who want to stay in saying that we're more safe staying in the European Union, and then you say we're more at risk from terrorism if we stay in, how is it going to be possible for the Conservative Party to stay together over these issues? It's so fundamental.
I think they're strong opinions and views, and of course they mean that we have to do something to change these elements that are in existence at the moment. I simply say that for those of us who want to leave, we believe fundamentally that a new relationship with the European Union would allow us to control our own borders, would allow us to put these checks in place, and we would work with the countries of the European Union to ensure that they were able to do the same.
But for members of the public, what they're going to see today and in the next few months is one senior government minister saying we're more at risk from terrorism staying in the European Union. Then they're going to see the Prime Minister saying no, we're safer staying in for the same reason. What are the public to make of that?
Well, I think the answer is that the public has to make their own view about whether they think they agree with one side or the other. The point I'd really make is that we've heard a lot of threats coming from those who want to stay in, that somehow this is going to be, less safe because we rely on our security with the European Union. I just don't fundamentally agree with that. I agree that it's good to have cooperation. It's absolutely right. This is why we're in NATO. NATO is the guarantor, absolutely, for those Baltic states and others. It's the one thing that ties America in, which is vital and important. So there, plus all of our involvements with other intelligence groups of countries and various other organisations we're part of, these are all very important, and I'm very big on international agreements and our position. But just say one point on this. If somebody thinks that it is the European Union that safeguards our security, I simply make this observation, that the Ukraine demonstrates what happened when the European Union got involved, encouraging the Ukraine, and what have we seen since then? When I'm told that Putin would like to see the UK leave the European Union, I don't think he needs to, because he sees the Crimea and he's now camped out in eastern Ukraine, and absolutely nothing much has happened to dislodge him. And even the sanctions regime, Britain had to argue like mad to get some pretty low-level sanctions imposed by other countries in the European Union, who even wanted to discuss getting rid of them after a while. So my point is, yes, we want to cooperate with everybody and we want to be able to do these things, but it is NATO and it is our strong commitment to the defence of other nations within NATO that gives us that critical component that does say to Putin, you've stepped past that mark and you step into something that you really don't want to do.
But whether it's on security or on trade or on economics, how can your campaign be so sure that other countries in the European Union would carry on wanting to work with Britain? You can't be sure of that. It's unknown, isn't it?
Well, the world is full of unknown things. That doesn't mean to say you stop making decisions about what you want to do. I think bold and optimistic people shape their destiny. I think those that worry about their future are the ones that get their destiny shaped for them. And I think I am utterly optimistic, and I'm rather struck by the pessimism, I think, of those who want to remain in. They say Britain can't do these things. Well, we can't be a global trading nation. We can't step out. It's a leap into the dark. We would be alone. We would be isolated. That Britain isn't capable. I think Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world, set to become the 4th largest in the world. It has the 4th most capable armed forces in the world. And if you look in Britain today, I think we're on the verge of a new renaissance. I think we're going to be, globally trading. We've got entrepreneurs, we've got activity in our high streets and in our businesses, which makes me really inspired as to the future of the UK. I am an optimist about the British people. No matter what has been thrown at them over the hundreds of years that we have been in existence, we have ridden it out and we have got better on the other side of it. And I think that's exactly the same for us when we leave the European Union. It's an optimism about the British people, not a pessimism, which I seem to see from those who want to stay in.
But can you level with people and at least admit it would be a gamble. It might be a gamble that paid off handsomely, but it might not.
As I said, all things in life are down to what you make of them. And I would only observe this, that for those who want to stay in, can they genuinely reassure us that in the next 5 to 10 years, staying in isn't a leap in the dark? After all, look at the massive problems of migration across the European Union. Look at the chaos. Look at Hungary putting up barbed wire all over it. Look at Austria now saying they're refusing to accept more than a few people coming in. The Greeks trying to veto a treaty because they were worried that they were going to be left with all the migrants. The Germans now in Bavaria absolutely up in arms about the numbers of migrants coming in, distorting all of their problems. And then there's the euro. You know, Greece is still teetering. I think Europe's been incredibly hard on the Greeks in their difficulties. Yes, they made a mess of it, but wasn't much, solidarity there. And the Italian banks, I'm told, are close to bankruptcy. Can those who want to remain in be so certain that the next 5 years doesn't bring serious chaos and problems, which will be made worse by the fact that the UK does not control its own borders and its own events? I say that neither side can absolutely make predictions, but I do say the difference for me is I am optimistic about the British people. I'm optimistic that this country is a remarkable country, filled with the most remarkable, democratic and tolerant people on the face of the planet. And it is this country that has changed the world. You just hardly look around without seeing what the UK has done for freedom, for language, for free markets. They're all British concepts. We should be proud of that and recognise it's time. It's our time. It's time for us to be independent again and forge friendships and relationships rather than be tied to something we simply complain about on a daily basis.
Let's finally get you to make a prediction. What are your chances of winning?
I think they're very good. I think the British people will listen to the arguments, and they will listen, and I hope their hearts will tell them that this country is that remarkable country that I've spoken of, capable of almost anything, and it is in fact being held back at the moment. So I think the opportunity to change that is theirs, it's in their hands, and I would certainly urge them, listen, think about it, but act on behalf of the UK. Don't worry about others, just worry about can we ourselves do the things that we think are necessary to achieve that independence of spirit and of statehood that is necessary for us to make an even better fist of things in the world.
Secretary of State, thank you very much.